Welcome to the Unknown Vault. Here, every mystery is not just a story, but a gateway to secrets long hidden. Are you ready to uncover what the world was never meant to know? If you are, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join us as we unlock the unknown together. On July 20th, 1969, humanity witnessed what was hailed as the greatest achievement of the modern age. That night, millions of eyes around the world were glued to their black and white television screens, watching in awe as a man descended from a fragile-looking spacecraft onto the dusty surface of the moon. Then came the words that would echo through history. That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong's voice, faint and static-filled from the unimaginable distance, became a symbol of triumph, a declaration that humanity had finally broken the boundaries of Earth. For many, this was not just about science or technology, it was a moment of unity, a moment that transcended nations, races, and beliefs. Children sat cross-legged on living room floors, their eyes wide with wonder. Parents held their breath. Scientists felt vindicated, as though decades of theories and calculations had been justified in one single moment. Governments celebrated, especially the United States, for whom this victory symbolized not only technological superiority, but also ideological dominance in the midst of the Cold War. The world seemed to stop turning, if only for a moment, to watch Armstrong and Aldrin bounce lightly across the lunar soil. And yet, as time passed, shadows began to creep into that perfect image. Doubts surfaced. Questions emerged. Was everything we saw that night truly real? How could a nation in the late 1960s, with computers less powerful than the phone in your pocket today, pull off such a flawless mission? To some, the story seemed almost too good to be true. What began as whispers of doubt grew into fully formed theories of deception, giving birth to one of the most enduring conspiracies of the modern era, the moon landing hoax. But before we dive into those theories, it's important to step back into 1969. Imagine it, a modest American living room, or perhaps a household in Europe, Asia, or Africa. Families gathered around the television, their only portal to the outside world. There was no internet, no social media, no alternative streams of information, just one official broadcast, one carefully curated vision of history. The sight of astronauts bounding weightlessly across the barren landscape was mesmerizing. It felt real. It felt monumental. Humanity cheered. The moon, once an unreachable companion in the night sky, had finally been conquered by human feet. Yet, behind those cheers, there were quiet murmurs, barely audible but persistent. Could this all have been staged? Those murmurs would not go away. They would grow louder, evolve, and eventually become one of the greatest conspiracies of all time. To truly grasp why the 1969 moon landing mattered so much, we need to step back into the tense atmosphere of the Cold War. The world at that time was divided into two camps, with the United States and the Soviet Union standing as colossal rivals, locked in a battle that went beyond weapons and economics. It was a struggle for the future of civilization itself. Every achievement was not just about national pride, but a message to the entire globe who would lead humanity into the future. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth, it shocked the world. The United States felt humiliated, as their ideological enemy had beaten them to a monumental achievement. Then, in 1961, the Soviets struck again by sending Yuri Gagarin into orbit, making him the first human in space. America was left scrambling, its people questioning their country's technological power and its government fearing that the Soviets might dominate not only Earth but also the heavens above. It was in this climate that President John F. Kennedy delivered one of the most iconic speeches of the 20th century. Standing before the nation, he boldly declared that before the decade was over, the United States would land a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth. The promise seemed audacious, nearly impossible, given how far behind America was at that moment. But Kennedy's pledge was not only about science or exploration. It was about geopolitics. If the United States could pull it off, it would prove to the world that democracy and capitalism were superior to communism. Thus began what came to be known as the space race. Both superpowers poured billions into research, recruited thousands of the world's best scientists, and developed technologies that had previously only existed in dreams. Massive rockets thundered into the sky, satellites were launched, and every success, no matter how small, was celebrated as a propaganda victory. For the American public, the Apollo program was more than a scientific project. It was a symbol of hope, pride, and national identity. Yet behind the glory and celebration, immense pressure loomed. The US government knew that failure was not an option. If they could not deliver on Kennedy's promise, the world would see them as defeated by the Soviets. The moon landing was not just an exploration mission. It was a political gamble of historic proportions, a gamble in which America's global reputation was on the line. And this is where one of the most crucial questions that fuels conspiracy theories begins to emerge. If success was the only option, if failure meant humiliation, then what would America do if they realized they couldn't actually reach the moon? Would they consider staging the event a grand illusion for the world to protect their image and ensure their supremacy? On July 16, 1969, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, a towering Saturn V rocket stood ready on the launch pad. Over 360 feet tall, it was the most powerful machine humanity had ever built. Inside, 3 astronauts prepared for what would become the most famous journey in history: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Millions of people gathered to witness the launch, some in person, many more through their televisions. The thunderous roar of the engines shook the ground as the Saturn V lifted off, a blazing trail of fire and smoke carving through the sky. NASA proudly documented every step of Apollo 11. After leaving Earth's orbit, the spacecraft set course for the moon, traveling nearly 240,000 miles over 3 days. The world listened as Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins sent back radio transmissions. Their voices were calm, sometimes even joking with mission control in Houston, creating the impression of confidence and ease. It seemed as if history was unfolding not in chaos or fear, but with precision and poise. On July 20th, Apollo 11 entered lunar orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin transferred into the lunar module, aptly named Eagle, while Collins remained alone in the command module Columbia. Circling the moon, as Eagle descended toward the lunar surface, tension spiked. Mission controls monitors showed fuel running dangerously low, with only seconds remaining before Armstrong manually maneuvered to a safe landing. Then came the words that electrified the world. Houston, tranquility, base here. The Eagle has landed. Across the globe, cheers erupted. Hours later, the moment that defined a century took place. Neil Armstrong stepped off the ladder and onto the moon, his voice crackling over the airwaves. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The grainy black and white footage captivated millions. Soon, Buzz Aldrin joined him, and together they planted the American flag, collected lunar soil, and set up experiments. Television cameras captured them, bouncing lightly across the surface, moving in slow motion under the moon's weak gravity. For viewers, it was breathtaking, as if humanity itself had traveled to that barren world. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited in solitude, circling the moon in silence. He later described the eerie isolation, knowing that on the far side of the moon, he was cut off from both his crewmates and Earth. Yet his role was vital. Without him, Armstrong and Aldrin could not return. After roughly 21 hours on the lunar surface, Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back into Eagle, blasted off, and rejoined Collins in orbit. Together, the crew set course for home. On July 24, 1969, their capsule splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, greeted by the US Navy, to NASA. Apollo 11 was nothing less than a triumph, a culmination of human ingenuity, bravery, and determination. The world applauded, and America declared victory in the space race. In the official history books, Apollo 11 is a story of achievement against all odds, a shining example of what humanity can accomplish. But to others, the story seemed too perfect, almost scripted. Could it be that what the world saw was not history itself, but a carefully crafted illusion? It didn't take long after the excitement of Apollo 11 began to fade for doubts to creep in. While most of the world embraced NASA's broadcast and photographs as undeniable proof of mankind's triumph, a small group of skeptics felt something was off. They questioned whether it was truly possible for humans to have landed on the moon in 1969, a time when technology was far less advanced than what we take for granted today. The suspicions grew louder as people scrutinized the details. In NASA's released footage and photographs, one of the most iconic debates centered on the American flag planted on the lunar surface. In the broadcast, the flag appeared to ripple, as though it were blowing in the wind. But how could that be possible when the moon has no atmosphere, no air, no breeze? NASA explained that the flag was designed with a horizontal rod at the top, which caused the cloth to appear wrinkled, not moving in the wind. To many, this explanation was satisfactory, but to conspiracy theorists, it felt like a convenient excuse. Another controversial detail came from the shadows. In several photos, objects cast shadows in different directions, suggesting multiple light sources, but on the moon, the only natural light source is the sun. Skeptics argued this was a clear indication the landing was staged in a studio, lit with artificial lights. Then came the mystery of the stars, rather, the absence of them. In NASA's photos and videos, the sky above the astronauts appeared pitch black, devoid of stars. NASA responded that the cameras were calibrated for the bright lunar surface, making faint stars invisible. Scientifically, this explanation made sense, but for those already suspicious, it only fueled the belief that the backdrop was nothing more than a painted or fabricated stage. Technology itself also became a point of contention. In 1969, the computers on board the Apollo missions had less processing power than a modern digital watch. Could such rudimentary machines truly guide astronauts hundreds of thousands of miles through space, land safely on the moon, and return home with pinpoint precision? To skeptics, the answer was a resounding no. These doubts weren't confined to ordinary citizens. Independent researchers, authors, and even former aerospace workers voiced their skepticism. They wrote books, gave interviews, and produced reports arguing that the moon landing was not a scientific triumph, but a Cold War hoax, carefully orchestrated by the United States to one-up the Soviet Union. Though the number of doubters was small compared to the billions who believed, their voices grew louder over time. Like sparks catching in dry grass, these doubts spread, fueled by media coverage and public fascination. The possibility of a staged moon landing was no longer just a fringe idea, was becoming a conspiracy theory with a following, one that challenged the very foundation of NASA's proudest moment. As the public began to examine NASA's photos and videos more closely, what had once been celebrated as triumphant evidence of mankind's greatest achievement started to look, in the eyes of skeptics, like signs of fabrication. Shadows that didn't line up, missing stars in the sky, and suspicious details became fuel for the growing theory that the moon landing was staged. Perhaps the most debated issue revolves around the shadows cast on the lunar surface. In several iconic photos, shadows appear to fall in different directions, suggesting multiple light sources. But on the moon, the only natural source of light is the sun. NASA explained that the uneven lunar terrain filled with rocks and craters could distort the angles of shadows. To scientists, this was logical. To conspiracy theorists, it was laughable. To them, the inconsistencies were unmistakable proof of studio lights being used to stage the entire scene. Another suspicious detail was the absence of stars in the lunar sky. In all Apollo photos, the heavens above appeared pitch black, completely devoid of stars. NASA's official explanation was that the cameras were adjusted for the bright lunar surface, which washed out the faint light of distant stars. The explanation made sense technically, but for doubters, it only deepened suspicion. To their minds, the missing stars weren't a trick of the camera, but evidence of a backdrop, a painted black curtain in some secret studio. Then there was the famous American flag. In the footage, it appeared to ripple, as if caught in a breeze. But on the moon, there is no air, no wind, no atmosphere. NASA clarified that the flag had a horizontal rod to hold it up, and the rippling effect came from astronauts twisting the pole while planting it into the ground. The wrinkles remained visible because, in the absence of air resistance, nothing smoothed them out. Still, conspiracy theorists weren't convinced. To them, the dramatic waving of the stars and stripes was pure theatrics. Lighting became another major point of contention. Many Apollo images show astronauts and the lunar module clearly visible, even when standing in shadow. How could objects in shadow be so well lit without additional light sources? NASA countered that the lunar surface reflected sunlight, bouncing it back onto objects in shadow. Again, a plausible explanation. But skeptics saw it as yet another excuse, proof of artificial lighting designed for a film set. Some photos went further, showing strange reflections in the visors of astronauts. Conspiracy theorists claimed to spot straight-line shapes resembling studio lights, or even silhouettes of unknown figures that shouldn't have been there. These anomalies quickly became fodder for debates across books, documentaries, and late-night discussions. The doubts even extended to the artifacts brought back from the moon. Lunar rocks presented as gifts to world leaders were scrutinized. The most infamous case happened in the Netherlands, where a moon rock turned out to be nothing more than petrified wood. Though NASA denied responsibility and called it a mix-up, for skeptics it was damning proof that the Apollo program was rife with deception. Every photograph, every video clip, Every artifact was dissected under the lens of suspicion. The more skeptics looked, the more they believed they saw cracks in NASA's story, and as these doubts spread, amplified by media coverage hungry for controversy, the idea that the moon landing was an elaborate hoax gained momentum. For many, one of humanity's proudest achievements now stood on trial in the court of conspiracy. Among all the moon landing conspiracy theories, perhaps none is as fascinating or as cinematic as the one involving Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick's name is often dragged into the debate because of his reputation as a visionary filmmaker, especially after the release of his 1968 masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The film's stunningly realistic depiction of space travel led many to believe that if anyone could fake a moon landing convincingly, it would be Kubrick. The theory goes that, faced with the enormous pressure of Kennedy's promise, NASA and the US government feared they couldn't achieve the feat in time, with their credibility at stake in the Cold War. They supposedly turned to an alternative plan. If they couldn't make it to the moon, they would create the illusion of having done so, and who better to craft that illusion than the man who had already shown the world how real space could look on screen. Conspiracy theorists often point to the eerie similarities between the visuals in 2001: A Space Odyssey and the footage from Apollo 11. The lighting, the camera angles, the way the lunar surface was depicted, these, they argue, were simply too close to be coincidence. To skeptics, it was Kubrick's invisible signature, a trace of his artistry hidden within the supposed production of the moon landing. The theory gained more traction through bizarre interpretations of Kubrick's later work. The Shining, 1980, for instance, is frequently cited as Kubrick's veiled confession. Conspiracy theorists note the character Danny wearing an Apollo 11 sweater, and they claim room 237 represents the distance to the moon, approximately 237,000 miles. Scenes of endless hotel hallways, strange patterns, and cryptic imagery are all said to symbolize Kubrick's guilt and his attempt to reveal the truth without openly saying it. Of course, Kubrick himself never confirmed any of this. There are no credible documents, no recordings, and no reliable witnesses to back up the claims. But in the world of conspiracy, the lack of evidence often serves as proof in itself, interpreted as the result of an elaborate cover-up by the US government. Hollywood, after all, has a long history of collaborating with the government for propaganda. During World War II, films were used to rally patriotism and shape public opinion. So, for those who already distrust authority, the idea that Hollywood could have played a role in faking the Apollo missions isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. To most scientists and historians, the Kubrick theory is nothing more than a myth, a fascinating blend of paranoia and pop culture. But myths have power. And thanks to the internet, the legend of Stanley Kubrick secretly filming the moon landing continues to thrive, debated endlessly on forums, in books, and in documentaries that claim to expose the hidden truth. Amid the rising tide of conspiracy claims that the moon landing was staged, NASA and the scientific community pushed back. They knew that unchecked doubt could erode public trust in science and diminish what they saw as humanity's greatest technological achievement, so they responded through detailed explanations, physical evidence, and the voices of the astronauts themselves on the issue of missing stars. NASA explained that the cameras used during Apollo were set for short exposure times to capture the bright lunar surface and the astronauts. In such settings, faint starlight simply wouldn't register. It's the same reason stars don't appear when you take a photo of a city at noon. Too much light drowns them out. For photographers, the explanation made perfect sense. For conspiracy theorists, it was brushed off as another excuse. The debate over shadows was also addressed. Scientists noted that the moon's surface is uneven, filled with craters, rocks, and slopes that can distort the angles of shadows. The phenomenon is easily replicated on Earth in hilly terrain. What looked like evidence of multiple light sources was, in reality, just a trick of perspective caused by rough terrain. As for the American flag that seemed to wave, NASA pointed out its special design. A horizontal rod held the flag upright, and the rippling effect came from astronauts twisting the pole while planting it in the ground. With no air on the moon, the folds remained in place, giving the illusion of movement. In footage, the flag only shifts when touched, never on its own. Beyond these technical explanations, NASA highlighted what they considered the most undeniable proof: the retroreflectors left on the moon. These devices still sit on the lunar surface today and reflect laser beams fired from Earth. Scientists around the world, including outside the United States, have confirmed their presence repeatedly. To NASA, this was ironclad evidence that Apollo astronauts truly set foot there. The astronauts themselves often voiced frustration at the accusations. Buzz Aldrin, in particular, was famously incensed when confronted by a conspiracy theorist who called him a liar. He struck the man, later stating that such claims weren't just an insult to him personally, but to the thousands of engineers, scientists, and technicians who had poured their lives into Apollo. Despite these rebuttals, conspiracy theories persisted. For some, NASA's explanations carried no weight because they saw the agency as part of the very system orchestrating the deception. But within the scientific community, physical evidence and data spoke louder than speculation. To them, Apollo wasn't a hoax. It was the crowning achievement of human ingenuity, a triumph that proved mankind could reach beyond Earth. By the 1980s and 1990s, the moon landing conspiracy theories had found a powerful stage: television. Long before the internet shaped our daily lives, TV was the ultimate medium for reaching millions. The turning point came in 2001, when Fox aired a documentary titled Conspiracy Theory: Did We Land on the Moon? The program captivated millions of viewers and reignited public doubt. For many who had never even considered questioning the Apollo missions, the show planted a seed of suspicion that grew into full-blown belief. The documentary recycled the classic claims: the missing stars, the impossible shadows, the fluttering flag. But it wasn't the claims themselves that mattered, it was the way they were presented. Dark music, suspenseful narration, slow-motion zooms on Apollo photos, and experts lending credibility made it feel like NASA was hiding something monumental. For viewers unfamiliar with the technicalities of photography or physics, the emotional storytelling hit harder than scientific rebuttals ever could. As television spread these doubts, the internet supercharged them. Early forums like Usenet and later personal websites became hubs for communities convinced that the moon landing was the biggest lie of the 20th century. Unlike TV, the internet offered uncensored spaces where anyone could post, speculate, and debate endlessly. It was the perfect environment for conspiracy culture to thrive. By the early 2000s, entire websites were devoted to proving the Apollo missions were staged. Grainy photos were analyzed endlessly, with arrows pointing to supposed wires, stage lights, or fake backdrops. As more people stumbled onto these communities, the narrative hardened. The moon landing wasn't a triumph, it was Hollywood on steroids. Then came YouTube, which gave the movement its most powerful weapon. Videos with titles like Moon Landing, Hoax or NASA Lies racked up millions of views. The formula was simple. Take authentic Apollo footage, add dramatic music, splice in conspiracy claims, and tell viewers they were uncovering the truth NASA didn't want them to know. For a younger generation, this was their introduction to Apollo, not through history books, but through slick, provocative videos. Meanwhile, scientists, amateur astronomers, and debunkers fought back online. They wrote blogs, created educational websites, and even launched YouTube channels explaining why the conspiracy claims were flawed. But their explanations often struggled to compete with the fast, flashy, and emotionally gripping nature of conspiracy. Content algorithms, designed to reward engagement, only made things worse, promoting the most outrageous videos while burying thoughtful rebuttals. As a result, the moon landing hoax theory didn't just survive, thrived. It became a fixture of pop culture, woven into late-night jokes, internet memes, and endless online debates. Even generations, born decades after Apollo 11 still, stumbled into conspiracy videos that made them question whether mankind had really set foot on the moon. Paradoxically, the more evidence NASA presented, the more some people believed it was all part of a cover-up. The moon landing conspiracy isn't just a debate among scientists, academics, or internet theorists. It has seeped into everyday life and become a fixture of popular culture. Since its inception, the idea that Apollo was nothing more than a Hollywood production has been whispered around family dinner tables, debated in classrooms, and dramatized on the big screen. It illustrates how conspiracy theories aren't only about facts, they're also about identity, culture, and shared imagination. On a social level, the conspiracy has fueled a broader sense of distrust toward institutions. For many, once the possibility of a faked moon landing is entertained, the door opens to doubting everything else: government narratives, official history, even the scientific method itself. What begins as skepticism about Apollo often spirals into suspicion of other world events, from 9/11s to climate change to pandemics. Once that trust cracks, it's incredibly hard to repair at the same time. The theory has also inspired lighter cultural expressions. It's been parodied in comedy sketches, referenced in songs, and turned into entertainment. The film Capricorn 1 spun an entire thriller around the idea of astronauts forced to fake a mission. Late-night comedians have made countless jokes about mankind reaching Hollywood before the moon. The conspiracy has become shorthand for questioning authority, a cultural symbol as much as a scientific dispute. Classrooms have not been immune to the impact. Science teachers frequently face skeptical questions from students. If we really went to the moon, why haven't we gone back? That simple question is often fueled not by textbooks but by memes, YouTube videos, or internet debates. For some teachers, it's an opportunity to teach critical thinking and the scientific method. For others, it's an uphill battle against the seductive simplicity of conspiracy videos that seem more convincing than a dry physics lesson. Another major cultural effect is the creation of alternative communities. Believers in the moon hoax often find belonging in online forums or meetups, where they see themselves as part of an exclusive club that knows the truth. The psychology is powerful. Being in the know feels empowering, even if the truth itself is questionable. Here, the conspiracy stops being about science and becomes about identity, about being different, special, or ahead of the crowd. Perhaps most striking is how the theory has transcended generations. Young people, born decades after Apollo still stumble across YouTube videos or TikToks questioning the moon landings. For them, the conspiracy isn't a historical curiosity but an active debate, as if they too were there in 1969 to wonder whether Armstrong's famous words were spoken on the moon or on a soundstage. The theory lives on, outlasting the very era that produced it. In short, the moon landing hoax has shaped modern culture in countless ways. It has become comedy, satire, art, and a rallying point for distrust of authority. Like an urban legend, it refuses to die, persisting regardless of how much evidence NASA or scientists present. Its power lies not in logic, but in stories have a way of surviving long after facts are forgotten. As we trace the long arc of the moon landing story, it becomes clear that this is not just about whether man actually set foot on the lunar surface. It's about trust, about how we respond to authority, and about how narratives are shaped in shifting times. Since 1969, Apollo 11 has stood as both a symbol of mankind's greatest scientific triumph and as fuel for skeptics who refuse to take history at face value. The power of conspiracy theories lies in their ability to spark doubt. They don't need to prove anything. They simply need to plant a seed. Why are there no stars? Why do the shadows look strange? Why haven't we returned more often? These questions, though answered many times by science, remain alive because rational explanations rarely capture the imagination the way mystery does. In the end, conspiracy is not about data, it's about story. And stories, especially those laced with suspicion and secrecy, spread faster than the driest scientific fact. This saga also reveals something fundamental about human nature. We crave mystery. We want to believe there's something hidden behind the curtain, that reality is not as straightforward as it appears. That's why the moon landing, despite the mountain of evidence, thousands of documents, hours of footage, astronaut testimony, and even physical retroreflectors still on the lunar surface, continues to fuel conspiracy theories. For some, imagining Hollywood stages and government cover-ups is simply more thrilling than accepting the proven truth. Yet paradoxically, this conspiracy culture has also had an unexpected silver lining. It has driven people to question, to research, to learn. While some dive into the rabbit hole of denial, others are inspired to explore astronomy, physics, and space history more deeply. The controversy itself becomes a gateway to curiosity, which has always been the engine of human progress. In the end, whether we believe the moon landing was real or staged, the story has left a lasting mark. It reminds us that alongside humanity's greatest achievements will always come doubt, debate, and the urge to search for deeper meaning. Perhaps that is the real mystery, not whether man walked on the moon, but why we, as a species, are never satisfied with the answers we're given. And so, as the screen fades to black and the haunting music settles into silence, one final question lingers. Do you believe Apollo 11 truly touched down on the lunar surface? Or have we all been unwitting actors in the greatest show of the 20th century?